We have all these metaphorical doors in our lives that we feel like we have control over or we should have control over. And I think we trick ourselves into feeling responsible for whether or not someone opens a door for us. And that's a trick. It's a way that we make ourselves unnecessarily miserable.
It's Sofia Franklin. You are listening to Sofia with an F, and the F is for phenomenal.
I'm so beyond excited to have you here. I think I reached out to you via DM.
Mm-hmm.
This paragraph, I don't even know what I said. Like, thank you for existing type thing.
That was very nice.
Yeah, I was going through, and I mean, I don't want to like take this away just right off the bat, but I feel like I need to tell this backstory to kind of explain like how personal this interview is for me.
Okay.
And how much pressure is on you to perform.
Oh, great.
I'm totally kidding. But I was having this really, really dark day, one that I haven't felt in a really long time, just debilitating anxiety, feeling really extremely depressed, thinking like having an existential crisis, kind of.
As you do.
As you do on Wednesday or whatever day. And I couldn't even meditate, which is huge for me. I couldn't focus. I didn't want to leave my apartment. Like it was a little bit me on the floor, just, and my phone on Do Not Disturb.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, later on in the day, I forced myself to go for a walk. I tried to do like a few meditations. I couldn't it was just, I could not focus.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm looking up at the Waking Up app, which I use to meditate, and I see this series titled Resilience. And I'm like, that sounds like some shit I could use right now, some resilience.
Yeah.
So I press play and I hear this young woman, very captivating, and I just completely was drawn into it. And then it completely did a 180 and I became obsessed with the series. It was silly, but I re-listened to this series like multiple times.
Wow.
And so I want to say thank you for that, first and foremost.
Just so you know, like that means a lot to me.
Good.
And I feel I'm really proud of that series because, I mean, I'm really grateful to Sam Harris for giving me the opportunity. Not a lot of people, when they talk to me about my experience, they typically want to do it from a sort of true crime lens.
Yeah.
And it's nice to talk about the things that, or the way that I experience it, which is processing trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave me this opportunity to not just be someone who is a traumatized person, but someone who has learned from processing and has some wisdom to offer that is applicable to anybody's life. I think one of the big traumas of wrongful conviction is feeling like you're isolated from the rest of humanity and the sense that no one can understand you. And I've resisted that impulse for a long time. Like even people who come up to me and say, oh, I can never understand what you went through. And it's like, I know that they mean well by that, but I want to say, no, we all have worst experiences of our lives. We all go through things, traumas that we need to unpack and process and grow from. And the way that I did it is a way that anybody can do it.
Mm-hmm.
So having the opportunity to really focus on that journey and not the journey of being traumatized, the journey of finding meaning and purpose and resilience through a process was really gratifying. And then to hear that like it came to you in the right moment, like that's very special and magical for me. And I'm not a magical person, but like knowing that it arrived at somebody's doorstep when they really needed it is very, very healing for me because I feel like I needed it when I was going through it. And so
do we start crying right now?
We're off to the races.
Because it felt magical to me. I can tell you the exact moment where I was standing when it hit me. And I don't know why I feel this emotional this early on, but it just it changed me in a lot of ways and changed how I process things. And again, thank you. But also, I think what you pointed out is how people like to say, well, they can't really relate to your story. And people will say that to me too. And people will probably say it to everyone, right? We're all having different struggles, but what you talk about within the series is applicable to everyone. So, kind of short of telling people to go listen to it,
Which they should.
which they absolutely should. Resilience on the Waking Up app. And can they access it anywhere else?
No, right now it lives on the Waking Up app, but you can subscribe to the Waking Up app. It's very affordable, or if you can't afford it, you can always reach out to Waking Up and ask for a free subscription. They really try to make it as accessible as possible to anyone. I think they're giving it to free or for free to people who are in prison, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think there's like you get a free month, if not that, a free week, and there you go. So let's just jump right into this. I think one of the major themes was stories / narratives that we tell ourselves, that society tells us, that our parents, put around us, that our friends tell us.
Yeah.
And you said something that is just put it in your bio, but don't actually put it in your bio because that'd be really weird in your dating profile or Instagram. But you said actively choosing what story we tell ourselves is the first step in building resilience. I mean, mic drop. I mean, that's insane. So can you kind of talk about just narrative and stories in general?
Yeah. And I think I'm going to have to build around that abstract idea by speaking very specifically of how I've seen it. So like I think I'm sort of unusual in the philosophy department where I've come to philosophy through direct observation of experience as opposed to going to school and learning about a lot of philosophy and then seeing it in everyday life. So the everyday life that got me to understand about the stories that we tell each other really arose while I was in the prison environment, and I saw the different kinds of stories that prisoners were telling themselves about why they were in there and what this experience meant. And the predominant story that I saw from a lot of people was a religious story. They were religious, and they had this idea that even though prison was a place of suffering, it was where they were meant to be according to God's will. And that was comforting, either because it meant that God had a plan and they were supposed to get something from this experience that was then going to carry them forward in their life, or they were in there because this was actually safer for them. This was a better experience for them than some other terrible experience that they could have been experiencing, but God saved them by putting them in a safe place or a safer place than what they might have been through. And, a lot of these women were people who had been raised in deep poverty, had suffered a ton of abuse. And in a way, prison was a safer place for them. It's not safe, but it is a place where there's only women around you. And so that kind of violence is not going to be the kind of violence that they might have experienced at the hands of men was not something they were having to deal with in a female-only environment. And a lot of them were, being sex trafficked. They were on the streets every night. And so the things that they were facing in their lives were very scary. And so it was comforting to them, this story they were telling themselves about how God was giving them this experience so that they could be safe or so they could grow. And as a non-believer in God, as an atheist, I didn't believe that, but I observed that and I saw how comforting, how it helped them to get through this sentenced, some of them sentenced to 10, 20 years in prison, like how they were able to reframe the story that they were telling themselves about what they were doing here and what it meant for their life in a productive way. And I thought that was fascinating.
That is beyond fascinating.
Yes. And then the question for me became, well, what does this experience mean to me? And is it necessary for me to feel like I'm just going through a traumatic thing that's going to destroy me? I saw a lot of people telling themselves that story. I saw a lot of people just medicating themselves into comas in order to get through the fact that they were losing years of their life to that they were expecting to spend outside of prison. And so I got into this place of like, you know what? I shouldn't be here, but I am. And it's not going to serve me to think about how I should be living some other life right now. There is no one should be living any kind of life. We are living the life that we have. And so given that this is my life and these are the circumstances of my life, what can I do with that makes me feel not utterly helpless to the experience? How can I be an agent within my own life and recognize the power that I do have, however limited it is? And it was very limited. I had very little control over most aspects of my life, but I did have control over the things that mattered. And that included my mindset, that included how I spent my time in my cell. And I was able to very slowly and humbly take steps to make a day worth living. And it just, once you go through that experience, suddenly any day can be made worth living in the smallest little way. And all it takes is a day. And then you get to the next day and you feel something else and something else is going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen. So
yeah, I remember you talking about that. And what a rare situation. We learn in meditation to accept things as they are, because we're constantly, I know me, for example, I have one uncomfortable feeling and I'm trying to shut it down, numb it, fix it. And meditation really teaches you to accept where you are. And you and your example, like you had to quite literally accept where I am in all aspects of it.
Yes. Yeah.
And in the truest form, the deepest form of it.
Well, and I, in a weird way, you can look at it this way if you want. In a weird way, I was lucky to have had this experience because I had no choice but to accept, right? Like I can't open that door. I am literally trapped. So it doesn't matter if I accept it or don't accept it. It is what it is. And I think for those of us who have not had that really like distinct, like this door is a locked door. We have all these metaphorical doors in our lives that we feel like we have control over or we should have control over. And I think we trick ourselves into feeling responsible for whether or not someone opens a door for us. And that's a trick. It's a way that we make ourselves unnecessarily miserable.
Is hoping that someone else will open this door for us.
Or wanting or thinking that we should be living a life that we're not living. Like, and I use door in like a truly metaphorical sense. Like, this is a life, if the life we're living is this room and the life we should be living is in the room next door, and all it takes is opening this door to get in there, that sense that we are that close and that if only I could convince this person to feel a different way, or if only I could get past this obstacle, I'm going to live the life that I should be living. It's this unnecessary struggle that is not really grounding you in the reality and in the opportunity of your current present reality that you have. And there's this paradox that comes with accepting things the way they are. I can't tell you the number of times I've had people say to me, well, I shouldn't, accept an injustice, right? Like they interpret accepting an injustice as like tolerating it and saying, well, it's not as bad, or, it's okay, status quo. And it's accepting reality the way it is does not mean maintaining the status quo. It means having a very clear vision of what your reality is and knowing how you can effectively act upon it, and not tricking yourself into thinking that you can act upon a reality that doesn't exist.
Right.
Are we ready to treat ourselves? I think we deserve it. Rakuten's Big Give Week is back. Get 15% cash back at hundreds of stores, including my faves, Good American, Ulta, and Fenty. Seriously, guys, I'm letting you in on my favorite shopping secret. Rakuten is how all of the in-the-know shoppers get the best savings. You get to shop the brands you love and already shop at while earning cash back on top of deals. During Big Give Week, which is May 6th to May 13th, the cashback rates are even bigger. I know personally, I will be shopping for so much beauty and travel. I mean, duh, like summer's around the corner. And you can be just like me and save on every single thing you need for your vacay. Like clothing, skincare, once again, travel, literally anything, Rakuten has it. And to make the process even more seamless, Rakuten deposits your cash back directly into your PayPal account. Or they can send you a check, whatever you want. Join today for free and get an extra 10% cash back boost. That is an extra 10% cash back on top of Big Give Week's 15% cash back. You will not see higher cash back rates than these. Go to Rakuten.com or download the Rakuten app, Rakuten. Shoppers get it. Skims. What can I tell ya? It really is just that good. I can't fight it. I can't deny it. All I can do is hop on board and share with the people I love, aka my family and you guys, the perfection that is Skims. Like Kim K just knows her shit, and she's really proved it with Skims. Every single item I have tried has been the best I've ever tried in that category. Like whether it's underwear, loungewear, their famous t-shirt bras. Kimberly Kardashian, she just knows clothes, especially when it comes to the basics. My Skims cotton jersey t-shirt, probably the most worn item of clothing from my closet right now. The fit is insane. It snatches me right at the waist, and I mean, I've washed this thing over 100 times, but the stretch and the shape, it still stays. I have it in the color kyanite, which is this kind of earthy blue toned color, but really I need it in every goddamn color because it is a staple in my wardrobe. I can lounge in it, which I do all the fucking time, wear it to a recording, or I could pair it with a baggy pant and heels and a little purse and look like the cutest thing ever for a night out. So you guys, shop the Skims t-shirt shop at skims.com. Now available in sizes extra, extra small to 4X. If you haven't yet, be sure to let them know that I sent you. After you place your order, select podcast in the survey and select my show in the drop-down menu that follows. It means a lot to me and helps me so much. And with that, love you, sleuths.
And knowing what you can control and really taking ownership of that.
Yes.
And the rest, you do have to accept it to be able to kind of let it go
Mm-hmm.
so that you can move forward, right?
And you can do the things that you can actually do.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's that unnecessary suffering comes from wanting to do things that you can't actually do.
Yeah.
And in the same way that you wouldn't, like, if someone were to say to you, I'm so depressed that I can't teleport, you would be like, well, why are you thinking, like, why are you making yourself miserable over a thing that you obviously can't do?
Right.
It's that way. Like, if you try to pose it that way, like, we just have to accept the reality that we can't teleport and do the best we can with the reality that we have.
Yeah. That leads me to this question that I had for you, and I thought about this over and over and over. Well, I guess it has more to do with kind of the stories. But once we come to the realization that we can control what we can control and we have to accept or really let go of the rest, how do we kind of start living our new narrative and our new story, this new story and this new narrative? I think you were basically explaining it.
We're living a narrative. We are all the protagonists of our own life. And I think a lot of us tend to, based upon the inputs that we've received as children and through our families and from society, we sort of get an idea of what our life should be. And that is the story of our life that we're telling ourselves that we are the protagonist of. And when our story doesn't match up with reality, then we start experiencing, at best, cognitive dissonance, and at worst, utter depression and despair. And especially when you are working so hard to move in one direction and your life is just taking a completely different direction, and it feels like no matter what you do, you can't go back to that story that you wanted to be living, then what you can experience is something called narrative foreclosure, when you feel like you are utterly powerless in your own life because you think you should be going this way and you're going this way. And the realization that I had was this direction of life that I thought I was going, that I should be living, not only is it not happening right now, it actually never existed in the first place.
Right.
This was just an idea of what I thought life would be and what it would mean and who I was going to be in the world. And I'm grieving a thing that doesn't even exist. And that grief, while grieving is good and important, it's also, you don't want that to be the only way that you're experiencing reality, because in the meantime, there is your life is still moving in this direction, and there is opportunity in that direction too. You're just not seeing it because you're seeing how it doesn't match up with the way that you want it to be going.
Yeah. Narrative foreclosure. Would you compare that to how some people talk about rock bottom?
Maybe, yeah.
In some sense. I think for me recently, I was just feeling a lot of burnout. And the past few months, I felt like a hamster on the hamster wheel, and I was just going. And I had to really look at why. And that's when I realized my narrative foreclosure.
Yes, yeah.
Right? I think I'm supposed to be here. I'm over here. Do I even really want to be over here? Is this actually what I want to do?
Yes, yeah.
And then you have to start asking yourself the really hard questions, right?
Yes.
But really empowering ones.
Yes.
So once you reach this narrative foreclosure, and I hope I didn't butcher it by
I think that's fair.
Comparing it to rock bottom.
No, I think that's a really that's an important comparison. I've not thought about it to myself that way because that's it's a terminology that a lot of times belongs in places like addiction culture, and the thing you imagine when you think of rock bottom is like you're high and in a ditch somewhere.
Yes.
but that if you could be high and in a ditch metaphorically in your own life.
Yes.
So, like if that's what it feels like, you just sort of inevitably ended up in this ditch and you have nowhere to go and nothing to do, and you've lost everything, lost any sense of agency in your own life. Like that is the narrative foreclosure, when you are not the author of your own experience, when you are not even really the protagonist anymore. You're just like a pawn of the universe, and it's moving you and dumping you, and that's that feeling that you have no power over your own life. And it's this paradoxical thing of realizing your limitations gives you the ability to work within those limitations and regain that sense of power and find weird opportunities in what previously felt like an impossibly limited existence.
Can you give me an example of
Yes,
that?
100%, because I know that was very abstract. The thing that I have really struggled and grappled with was the idea that through no fault of my own, through no doing of my own, I will forever be known for the worst experience of my life. I am forever the girl who was accused of murder. And if I just approached it with a mindset of like, that's not fair, that's not what it should be, I'm going to feel, and I have felt, incredibly limited by that experience. I've made the comparison of like, there's literally nothing I can possibly do or achieve in my life that will ever make it so that the person I come across from when they hear, oh, you're Amanda Knox, they won't think of girl accused of murder. Yeah. I'd have to cure cancer on the moon, and win American Idol at the same time for somebody to be like, oh, that's not the girl accused of murder. And like, so in a way, I felt so utterly helpless to that narrative, until I realized that just accepting that reality opens up opportunities that I didn't really consider or imagine at the time, where I was resisting that reality. This conversation is an opportunity that has arisen because of that limitation in my life. And this is a valuable experience for me, and I'm so grateful that it's valuable to you. Like, I'd never anticipated in my life that I would be sitting across from someone who would tell me I was in rock bottom, and then I heard you talk about your experience and it helped me through it. Like, that was not who I imagined I would be in my life.
Yeah.
But accepting that reality has allowed me to find space and power and agency in the opportunity of that limitation.
The mental clarity and just how powerful your mind is like, how long did it take you to get here?
So I feel like the answer to that is a little complicated.
Yeah, I'm like,
it's not like there was like the one moment where it flipped a switch. I feel like I was lucky enough to be predisposed to a number of different feelings in my life that have served me in processing my experience. What do I mean by that? I am someone who's prone to sadness, not anger. I feel angry, like I feel that feeling, but it's not when something happens to me that's traumatic. The predominant feeling that I feel is sadness, not anger. And so that place of sadness, I feel, was one in which it allowed me the possibility of being more curious about my experience than I would have been were I angry. If I'm angry, I'm resisting. If I'm
Mhm.
sad, I'm accepting. And that acceptance allows me to find that space and to have that compassion for myself that I wouldn't otherwise have if I were just angry about the situation. And I saw a lot of people grappling with anger in prison, and it was not serving them well. It
Yeah.
was debilitating ultimately. And so I really, as vulnerable as I felt like I could not afford to be angry. So I allowed myself to process that trauma in action in real time with sadness. And 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 I feel lucky to have that came easily to me, that came naturally to me. Similarly, I think I'm very naturally a I resist black and white thinking.
Mm.
I don't even believe in good and evil necessarily.
Yes.
I just know that some things hurt and some things feel good, and I would
And even then, sometimes we don't really know. Maybe they do both.
yeah, but like I know that like in my life, I hope that how people experience me is through pleasure and through healing and not through harm. And so that is how I guide myself in my life. And watching as people who were harming me were convincing themselves that they were doing the right thing led me to a space of deep curiosity about how our minds work
Mm-hmm.
and how it is that people convince themselves that in the harming of a person, they're the good guys. And it's because we believe in a lot of ideas about good and evil. And it's because we have narratives that we're telling ourselves about who we are and what our role in the world is and whether or not we can make a big mistake that would lead to innocent people suffering. Like seeing the cognitive biases that were at play in my own case granted me access to the human mind that I also wouldn't otherwise have had. And I was deeply curious about it and predisposed to having, again, compassion for how people's minds were betraying them, um, rather than, judging them for it
Yes.
necessarily.
I don't know how many times I can give you guys a heads up, but we are hitting the road this summer. Maybe not the road, definitely the tarmac. Italy, Spain, South Africa, Timbuktu, wherever we want to go, we're going. Only this time we will be prepared to mingle with the locals and probably most likely find our husbands. Introducing Rosetta Stone, the most trusted language learning program available on desktop or as an app, truly immersing you in the language you want to learn. I obviously know a few words here and there from various languages. How am I going to clearly communicate that I want that classic flap Chanel bag in the window if I can't say it explicitly? And men, regardless of nationality, need to hear what you want crystal clear. No room for confusion. Zero confusion this summer. All right, ladies? Rosetta Stone offers 25 languages featuring fast language acquisition and speech recognition with a lifetime membership, now 50% off. Don't put off learning that language. There's no better time than right now to get started. For a very limited time, Sofia with an F listeners can get Rosetta Stone's lifetime membership for 50% off. Visit rosettastone.com/Sofia. That's 50% off unlimited access to 25 language courses for the rest of your life. Redeem your 50% off at rosettastone.com/Sofia today.
The biases is something I definitely want to touch on, specifically the anchoring bias. But before we jump into that, you talk about your worst fear was that for the rest of your life, you are basically going to be tied and perceived as this thing that happened to you. And so, how are you able to kind of rewrite your own story, create your own narrative that aligns with your values while not discrediting or kind of ignoring or trying to black out or block out your past. Because I think that's where I've ran into some issues, you know?
Yeah. No, I hear you. And I think that goes again to that sense of narrative foreclosure, that not only has your past been written for you, but also your future, because your past predetermines your future. So in my case, one might say, okay, wrongly convicted, even if you, are not in this space of like trying to determine whether or not I'm guilty or not, like even if it's accepted, like I was wrongly convicted, I spent years in prison for a crime I didn't commit. It was made international news for nearly a decade. Like that is a traumatized person. And a traumatized person operates in the world according to their trauma, and therefore is going to live a certain kind of life. And I didn't like the story that was being sort of laid out before me as what my life was going to be as a result of this traumatic experience. And I mean, again, you can look at it as a blessing and a curse, but like the blessing part of the worst experience of my life being so public is that I could never lie to myself and say, I'm just going to pretend this didn't happen and like change my name and just move on as if it didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that there was no escaping it. And as a result, it forced me to say, if I don't like the story that is being told about how I'm going to be traumatized for the rest of my life and triggered and sort of debilitated by this experience, instead I'm going to try to imagine a life where I'm not debilitated, I am empowered by this experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a story that I can drive towards. That is a story that gives me actionable choices and offers me opportunities that I can embrace.
Yes.
That's where that's the switch. Is this something that limits my choices or offers me opportunities? And I think I mentioned in the series my relationship with the prison chaplain, who was a very good friend of mine. And he said something to me that really stuck with me, which was, when you pray to God for strength, He doesn't give you strength. He gives you the opportunity to be strong. And so looked through that lens, take away the God part out of it. If there is an opportunity that is rife with struggle and obstacles in your path, if you can surmount them,
mm-hmm.
what can it say about you as a person?
Yeah.
And also, what can you do that pushes against that narrative?
Mm-hmm.
So a good example of this is I, was told a lot that there wasn't ever really hope of connecting with or convincing the world of law enforcement, and especially the people directly involved with my case, that there was a mistake that was made and that I'm a real human being and not this caricature of a person. And I didn't like being told that was impossible. Maybe this is just me being stubborn, but like when people tell me that something's impossible,
you don't like that.
I'm like, until I do it.
I want to do it right now.
I'm going to do it right now. So I'm going to go and like talk to my prosecutor.
Right.
And I did. And I talk a little bit about that. I don't go into detail. I eventually am going to go into detail about what that experience was like. But like having people tell me, nah, you're never going to get through to him. I was like, just watch me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you tell me that that's a closed door, we'll see.
I'm going to go do it.
We'll see.
It's like the little kid, like, do not press the red button. And you're just kind of,
Yeah, I think
I'm going to do it.
there's a little something of that in there because I don't like being told that I'm limited by my life.
Mm-hmm.
I push back against that. And in fact, like, and I'm not saying that I'm, striving towards spontaneously teleporting, right? But like when it comes to what I am capable of, no one can stop me from being kind to someone.
Yeah.
No one can stop me from reaching out with compassion to someone. Like there's actually nothing stopping me.
Mhm.
So why not do it? And why not allow that be the thing that really defines who I am in this experience instead of the terrible thing that happened?
Yeah. It gets tricky when it's such a big part of your story and it also lended itself to the powerhouse, right, that you are now, and lended itself to all of this wisdom and knowledge you have to share. But then you also feel like you have to talk about it. So then you're also like keeping it fresh in the minds of people. And by the way, I'm totally projecting right now. Like I'm talking about my own. I'm talking about my own shit where I get so much conflicting feedback where it's like, you know what? You're seen as an underdog. That's a great place to be and just stay there and like don't talk about the past and really own this new thing and where you are now. But also, you got to kind of talk about it because it, is so much of you.
And it
so much
informs
of your
who you
history.
are now,
Right.
right? I mean, the way that I look at it is
Maybe it's the way you talk about it.
it's the way you talk about it. It's the way you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's the way that you know that this who you are or what you experienced in the past is not static. You are continuing to grow. It's not like you move away from it, you grow out of it.
Mm-hmm.
You emerge from the experiences that you've had in your past. And so I have come to a place of no longer feeling like my past is this ball and chain that I'm dragging around with me. It is instead this deep, dank mulch that I am emerging from. And because of the richness of that, like, and the darkness of that experience, it makes it all the more extraordinary, even to me, that I have emerged the way that I have.
Yeah.
And I feel really good about that. It was not guaranteed that I would emerge the way that I am today. I could have emerged bitter and rageful and depressed and lying on the floor and not wanting to leave my apartment. And I've had moments like that. I've had moments where I felt utterly trapped and like there's nothing I can do that will ever matter.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because I got trapped in that idea that our lives are static.
Yeah.
Instead of there's nothing like inherently good or bad about my past. It's kind of irrelevant when it comes to the present and when it comes to the future. You decide in this moment what it means and if it's going to debilitate you or empower you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just chose to be empowered by it. And that sounds like so cheesy, like just choose. But like at a certain point, it comes down to that, just choose.
Yeah.
Do you want to be debilitated or do you want to be empowered by it? That does not mean that your triggers go away. That does not mean that your pain goes away. That does not mean that your fears go away. But you still can go through your life taking ownership of all of it.
Mm-hmm. And the ownership piece was like, I swear to God, it like changed my brain forever. When
brain surgery without the scalpel.
Yes, I don't need to do the
it.
psychedelics, which I still am planning on doing, by the way.
Yes, pro. I'm very pro.
You are pro. Okay. I was gonna do like the Hoffman process or something like that, and I'm like,
I don't know what that is.
It's like I'm gonna butcher it, but it's kind of like a retreat that you do with a bunch of other people, and they take your phone, and I've heard it's incredible. But I really want to dive into this world of psychedelics. This is also coming from the girl who I've smoked weed a lot, and every single time I want to go to the emergency room. But this is also the girl who's tried really hard drugs and has no issue with them.
Got it.
But weed has never been one of my drugs that I can do.
Well, if you want, Chris and I on Labyrinths did this big series about psychedelics and talking to a lot of different people in the field, even talking to Sam Harris. And I think the big takeaway that I took is that psychedelics really can help sort of very quickly put you in a place of the healing potential, but it's really on you to integrate that experience in a meaningful way into your life.
Yeah.
And that's where like a group setting that prolongs itself many days after the psychedelic experience can really come in handy, because the more time that you spend with like processing that profound experience and integrating it into your sense of lifestyle, the better you're able to really hang on to those positive effects.
Interesting. I, for some reason, thought it was legal.
Oh, in New York?
Yeah.
In New York. You can come to Oregon, where it's very, very legal, and to Washington, where it's basically legal. Like, no one cares.
Well, I mean, there's like shamans, and I don't even want to call them that, but like holistic doctors, that I know that now I understand I'm going to have to pursue, because I don't know what world I was living in. I keep seeing ads for ketamine therapy and like, hey, at-home ketamine therapy. We just stopped by. So I was thinking.
You just go to the pharmacist and be like, oh, can I have 1 dose of ketamine, please?
That's how, I swear to God, how these ads are targeted at me. At-home ketamine therapy. Like, it's just so easy. And I'm like, okay, well, if they do that for ketamine, I'm sure they do that for, mushrooms. They don't.
No, it's still very.
I checked in with my doctor. They don't do it like that. But I will do it with someone I trust, and I have like a few sources. But you're saying it's legal
in Oregon. Yes.
So you can go to like a doctor.
You can go to a doctor. You can go to a therapist specialist who is trained in the specific therapeutic way to be there with you while you're present, but also to help you integrate. So they are the people who organized this legalization effort really in Oregon have really been very mindful about how to do this in a way that's not going to result in backlash the way that weed legalization happened, where like weed legalization happened and then a whole bunch of people have been profiting off of it at the expense of entire communities that were vilified about it. So like they are trying to make it accessible. They are trying to make it respectful of the cultures that they're deriving their knowledge from. And they're really trying to train people to be also like knowledgeable about like how the mind works, not just, spiritual about it, like really looking at the full ways that a human being spiritually, physically is impacted by the chemical and treating that experience with the respect that it deserves.
So I'm going to Oregon then.
Yes, go to Oregon.
Because
I can connect you with the people.
And that sounds exactly like what I want. And I'm not discrediting these people that, are usually the ones who are doctors in their own right.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not discrediting them at all. I'm just saying for me and my experiences with marijuana, I want to be at least within 20 minutes of a hospital and not like ayahuasca in the middle of the forest. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I hear you.
I think I'll just go in with still a little bit of that hesitation that I think is normal, but just like a little more chill. Okay, so Amanda, let's move on a little bit. I want to talk about your own worst (parentheses best) critic.
Mm-hmm.
And my biggest takeaway from it was how much we self-judge ourselves. But when I say how much, no, for real, how much, to what extent?
Mm-hmm.
And I started to notice it, and it was mind-blowing. Because you hear negative self-talk. Oh my God, I'm super hard on myself. I
Mm-hmm.
talk about that all the time. A lot of people can relate. But when you really, really break it down through meditation and notice
Mm-hmm.
instinctively
Mm-hmm.
how you talk yourself down or judge yourself.
Or blame yourself for all of the bad experiences that you have.
Thank you. What's like an example we can give people? Just like even a thought process.
Sure. Well, I feel like a big example that I give in the series was how it was very automatic and surprisingly automatic for me to assume fault for my own wrongful conviction.
Mm-hmm.
Where, like, very clearly I have very little power and agency in the situation. I'm not the one who arrested me. I'm not the one who wrongly accused me. I'm not the one who sent me to prison for years. Like, all of that was actually not a product of my own making.
Right.
And yet, I just convinced myself that if only I had spoken Italian better, or if only I was able to talk about what it was like to be hit and yelled at in my interrogation, if only, like, I put it on myself.
I mean, to the point where you said it out loud and your husband, Chris, had to point it out to you.
Yes.
No, Amanda, you didn't.
Yeah, I said, the thing that I said that really wigged him out was, I was just thinking to myself, like, I'm so sorry for what I put my family through.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my family just went through hell to try to save me. They spent years of their lives putting everything, all of their dreams, their ambitions, their saving, like everything on hold, sacrificed in order to save me. And I just felt so guilty for that.
Yeah.
And I would say things like, I'm just so sorry for what I put my family through. And my husband would like physically stop me and be like, you did not put your family through anything. This is not on you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just so easy. We're so quick to assume fault, I think, as women. But I also think that it's a way of thinking that we have control over our lives, but in the wrong way. We shouldn't be taking responsibility for other people's decisions. We should be taking responsibility for our own. Yeah.
That's really interesting. It's like, we should be taking ownership of our lives, yet we're over here taking ownership of like these little things that are A, either not wrong, or B, not your fault.
Yes.
Yeah,
we're taking ownership of the wrong things.
Literally.
And again, it's choosing a debilitating narrative as opposed to an empowering one.
Yeah. And it happens so quickly. I'm trying to think. I think I was like working out with my personal trainer and we were talking about this, and I said something like, oh, I have like really shitty knees because I used to cheer and be in gymnastics when I was younger. And then immediately I was like, but I mean, that's like an excuse. Like, obviously, like, I can do this shit. But we were doing like lunges, okay? I don't know why I'm like trying to make it sound.
Sometimes lunges are just hard. It's okay. You didn't do anything wrong.
People are like, were you doing fucking box jumps? Like, or like what? What kind of CrossFit? No, I was not training for a marathon. I was simply doing lunges with heavy weights, by the way.
That's hard. Anyone would have sore knees from that.
Thank you. Did I just have to include that there were heavy weights? No. I didn't. It's like, it's this just immediate, like, I need to hurry and justify it to myself or to whoever's listening. Like,
right.
no,
right. Instead of just being like, it was hard.
Yeah.
Some things are just hard.
Yep.
And it's no one's fault.
Yep.
Sometimes things are just hard.
Sometimes things are just fucking hard. Okay, so Amanda, I want to ask you some questions that are like a little bit different.
Cool.
Your trust issues coming out of that, before going into that experience. I don't know who on the planet doesn't have trust issues, primarily women. How are you able to find your husband, Chris? Because you talk about him for a significant amount of your resilience story.
Oh, do I? I didn't even realize.
Actually, sorry, Chris. I can't give you significant, but like there were a couple shout outs, which is significant in itself.
He has played a significant role.
Yes.
To be fair.
That's what I meant. You could tell by her storytelling how significant he was. How were you able to, was it just like open arms with Chris, or were you like, you need to prove yourself to me for 3.5 months, which is what I do?
That's a really great question. And maybe to give you the backstory, I grew up pretty well taken care of. Nothing bad had ever happened to me. People were generally nice to me. I had a great growing up. Like I didn't have trauma from growing up. I was never abused by anyone. And so being a 20-year-old going and studying abroad, I had no reason not to trust people, right? Like I didn't feel anxiety about people. In fact, I loved people, and I loved doing things like immersing myself in a crowd and just like watching people. And I was very quick to smile at strangers or to strike up conversations. That I was just a very like outgoing personality like that. And then in the prison environment, I learned very quickly to be invisible as much as possible. It was just safer that way. So I interacted with other prisoners insofar as, helping them with things, but I learned that I could not trust anyone. Because I was the famous prisoner. And so I just kept to myself. I stayed busy doing my own things, and I did not do a lot of the gossiping or, fraternizing. Like I was I was nice, but I was distant. And coming home, I really, in prison, I sort of had told myself that I would get to go back to my life. In my brain, I thought for a while there, I was like, I'm just living someone else's life by mistake, and I just want to go back to my life.
Yeah.
And in that moment of acquittal, I had a sort of a flash of that again, like, oh, maybe I am going to get my life back. I am going to get to go back to being an anonymous college student. And then, of course, I get home and I'm very quickly dispelled of that notion. I am forever this girl accused of murder. All of my friends have moved on, not in the sense that they don't care about me, but they're not in classes with me anymore. I'm just living life at a different pace. And so I felt very isolated from the rest of humanity. And because I was very literally a target of the tabloids, I didn't feel like I could trust anyone.
Literally anybody.
Anyone.
I'm sure
who I didn't know.
I'm sure there were moments where even your family, you were like,
There were moments when I had to have conversations with members of my family, or just recognize that there were certain things that I couldn't share with members of my family. My Oma, for example, who's old and very proud of me and is on Facebook. And I'm just you know what? I need to just not share with Oma certain things so she doesn't share them on Facebook and then
Right.
it's picked up by a tabloid.
And then she has no idea how to take it down. We know
Exactly.
that.
We know.
cannot explain to her over the phone how to take that post down.
And I'm just not I don't want to force her to live in a state of questioning and paranoia that I'm having to force myself to live in. So I'm just going to limit the kinds of things that I share with people I love, so I'm not having to burden them with the sense of paranoia that I live with.
Yes.
Then comes along Chris. And our meet cute is actually great. At the time that I met him, I was writing under a pseudonym for a local newspaper doing arts correspondence. And actually, I think at the time that I met him, I had just started writing in my own name. But prior to that, I had been writing, for a year and a half at least under a pseudonym so that nobody would just dig into these profiles of, the plays that are going on in West Seattle and trying to figure out if I'm a murderer by the language that I use in a friggin', play review. So I read a copy of his debut novel. I review it for the paper. I submit it. Done and done.
Debut novel.
His debut novel, War of the Encyclopedists. I wrote a rave review.
That title is incredible. Standalone.
Yeah, War of the Encyclopedists. I like to say that I wasn't sleeping with the gentleman until after I read it. What better review than that? But no, I read this novel. I submitted to the paper. Done and done. Except the very next day, I walk out of my apartment building, and in the diner window across the street, there was this poster for a book reading for this exact book that I had just finished reading and reviewing. And it was at my local bookstore that very night.
Mm-hmm.
And it all felt a little serendipitous. I thought, oh, that's interesting. And but it was not a book reading was not typically something that I would do. It was public. It was around people who might recognize me and might say something. I did not go and do public things. I did not go to bars. I did not do karaoke. I stayed pretty much to myself.
Yeah.
So walking into a social space
was a big deal.
Was a big deal for me. And I thought, well, maybe I can poke my head in and nobody will notice. And of course, as soon as I poke my head in, everybody notices and there's whisper, whisper, whisper. But I sit down and I try to enjoy this book reading. And I see these two best friends who wrote a novel together. And one of them is got this Elton John vibe to him, big glasses, stripes carved into his beard, flashy outfit. And then this other guy who's bald and muscular and military guy who speaks with a lisp. And they just clearly adore each other. And I just think this is the cutest bromance I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
So I interview them for the paper later. And when I'm interviewing them, it's a nice conversation. We're talking about books and writing, but also Star Trek and Scotch or, whatever. It's very natural. And at the end of this long hangout session is what it turned into. Gavin gave me a big hug. Chris shook my hand and said, "Hey, we should be friends." And I walked away from that experience thinking, oh my God, is it possible for me to make friends with people now? This was very shortly after I was fully exonerated, so I was no longer on trial anymore. And it was my first glimpse at what was potentially possible for me. This opportunity to make friends with somebody that was new.
Mm-hmm.
And so Chris was one of my first friends that I made after being fully exonerated. And 9 months after first meeting him, we started dating. And I knew that at that time, I was still sort of treating my past as a ball and chain. So I approached him we approached each other. We liked each other. We clearly liked each other. And, but he at the time, I'm sorry to out you, boo. He at the time was playing the field. So I was not the only girl that he was hanging out with. And it was kind of great. It was so low stakes.
Mm-hmm.
And because I didn't feel like I needed him to commit to my baggage, right?
Yep.
Like I was just like, you know what? I enjoy being around you. And that's good enough for me. I had sort of resigned myself to the idea that I probably was never really going to get to do life with a family. Like
Interesting.
I just thought that like my experience made me unapproachable. It was, again, so much of a struggle, so much of a limitation that I didn't really feel like someone else could enter into that limitation and really blossom in their life. And instead, you know, Chris, to his credit, like he didn't really know about my case. He's not a true crime guy. He is a poetry guy.
Yeah.
He knew that people knew of me.
Yes.
He knew that it had to do with something scandalous, something true crime. But he didn't, like, upon meeting me, go and Google me and go down the rabbit hole.
Right.
And even as he was hanging out with me, people would come up to him and be like, "Oh my God, what do you think?" Like, blah, blah, blah. And he would just be like, dude,
he's like, she's one of 4 or 5 right now.
Well, but also like sort of against his wishes, he found himself liking me the best of all the. He was just like, this is like an incredible person that I love hanging out with. She's so smart, so interesting. Like his roommate was like behind the scenes going, "Pick Amanda." and so eventually he just found himself like canceling dates with other girls so he could keep hanging out with me. And then
the rest is history.
And the rest is history. And he's now fully knowledgeable about the case because it's a big part of who I am.
Yes.
But it's not the way that we entered into a relationship. And it's certainly not a limitation to our relationship at all.
Which is just a beautiful, incredible story in itself, but also is just a testament to there are people out there, and a lot of them, that won't like look at you and think of you just for your story. A lot of them will, but a lot of them won't.
And actually, Chris is one of the reasons why I started feeling like I wasn't limited by this story that I was encapsulated in. He would, you know, I didn't always talk about my case or whatever, but little things would come up in conversation. Like he'd be like, "Oh, have you seen the movie WALL-E? Let's watch WALL-E." And I'm like, "What's WALL-E?" And he'd be like, "Well, how did you not see WALL-E? It was this incredible movie." And I'd be like, "I think I was in prison at that time." And like little like jokey things would come out, and he would recognize in me little brilliant insights that I might have and be like, "That's not a usual thing. Like this thing that you have, this compassion that you have, this curiosity you have, like this is special.
Yeah.
This is a good thing that you have." And he helped sort of break that open for me and show me when I was doubting myself that there was something valuable in all of what I had.
That's really beautiful. And to find a partner that you can share that with and who can also bring that to your attention and to your awareness.
And not be intimidated by that.
Not be intimidated is like, where do we find another? Chris, do you have a brother or what? What's the deal?
He does have a brother. Actually, can I shout out his brother for a second?
Absolutely.
Because his brother is a very special person who, first of all, like one of my very special moments that I've had with his brother is his brother like just really embracing me. His father has done this too. Both of them have embraced me and said, like, "Thank you for making my brother or my son so happy." Like, just that, like, they're very, like, gracious people, gracious men who are very in touch with their feelings somehow. But his brother, I don't know if we can talk, but he's a Ren Fair performer. He's like the director of a company called the Seattle Knights who perform in Ren Fairs and ride horses and wear armor and like sword fighting.
Okay.
And yeah, it's hot to a certain crowd of people.
Listen, I will look into it. I've heard of jousting.
Jousting.
This is a whole different level, which shows what he's capable of.
Yes.
Above and beyond. but yes. Is that the shout out? Or do we need to give the name?
Yes, that is a shout out. So Seattle Knights, for those who are not aware, of the brilliant sword play and jousting that can be observed and had.
That sounds amazing. I'm from Utah, and the closest thing we have to that is the Shakespearean Festival, which is actually big there.
I mean, it's the same crowd. It's all people who like to stuff themselves into corsets, you know.
Right.
Have you heard of a Corsetgasm, by the way?
I'm very intrigued.
Okay, so the Corsetgasm is you're stuck in your tight corset all day in this like sweltering weather in the middle of a Renaissance fair or a Shakespearean fair, and at the end of the day, when you release the corset, and it's just Corsetgasm.
Okay. I thought it was going to be a little bit like crazier. Like, I don't know. You know how like you can have an orgasm from the bottom of your feet? I thought it was going to be a little something
I'm
like
sure
that.
somebody gets an orgasm from like being strapped up, but like this is just literally the release that you feel after a long day of being strapped in.
Which is, the relief should be compared to an orgasm. It is like taking your bra off at the end of the day times 100.
Yes. Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So
you know what it is. You've been in a corset before.
Absolutely. And I wish it was for the right reasons. In lingerie after Valentine's Day, but no, it was at the fair.
That's a great reason.
It actually
so
really
great.
is. Okay. Amanda, this has been so incredible. I really tried to like balance this with how do I take her advice that has completely changed my life for the better and make it applicable to everyone listening. And I hope we weren't talking too abstract.
Yeah, I do feel a little bad for talking in abstracts, but it's like, I mean, listen to the series and see how it resonates, because I feel like, again, everyone is moving through their lives and experiencing these narratives, and just having a moment of pause to realize that you're telling yourself something that is making you miserable unnecessarily is like a really powerful moment.
Yes.
And then like being willing to find the opportunity in, I mean, God, it sounds so stupid. Find the opportunity in the obstacles. Just like
it
shoot
really
me in the head.
does. You think that you sound corny, but like you're just dropping like insanely profound things.
And I'm glad you pointed out like the women part of it.
Self-judgment.
Yeah, it was a self-judgment.
You
just called me out. You called me out. Thank you. I appreciate that. I do think like it's really important for women to enter into not just the wellness space, but the resilience space.
Yeah.
Because I think like we end up getting pigeonholed in like victim mentality and like self-help sort of space, and then in the mindfulness like resilience space, it seems like in the stoicism space, it seems like such a red meat man person kind of thing, and it's absolutely not. Like some of the most resilient people that I know are women who have gone through incredible struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be this like big external thing. Like it could be a big internal thing. Like you have been telling yourself, you have been the worst critic of your whole life, and you feel miserable about yourself, even though nothing bad has ever happened to you. You just sort of hate yourself for no reason. And like then moving past that, like embracing that is what is happening, and then finding clarity in where you're coming from, having compassion for yourself, and then moving forward. Like that is what the bravest thing that you can do as a human being. And I see women doing that all the time.
Yeah. I think that yes, everyone should go listen. It's on the Waking Up app, Resilience, and the way that you are able to talk about things is really magical and is really a gift, because it's things I've heard before, but they just never registered. And then after hearing you kind of break it down, it was able to resonate with me. So thank you. And then your podcast that you do with Chris, the man of the hour,
Labyrinths, yes.
And where else? Where else should they find you?
I know
you have a New York Times bestseller, but
we do. I do, and we have a show in the works. We have a book in the works. So I would say follow us at knoxrobinson.com and stay tuned because there are some really exciting things in the works that are going to be coming out.
Me typing it down.
Me
typing it down right now, like the biggest fangirl ever, and I apologize. Okay, sleuths, thank you so much for listening. Amanda, thank you so much. I wasn't calling you a sleut, by the way, just the people
Call
listening.
me a sleut. It's fine. I'm down with it.
The humorous catharsis, which we didn't touch on, is like I'm feeling it, I'm seeing it, and it's humorous catharsis, people. It's a great one, and thank you so much.
Thank you.